I think we'll get started because I know you've all got a lot to cover. But I just wanted to take the opportunity just to introduce this session myself, especially because there's so many colleagues from NCFE and our providers with us today. So I'm Dr. Rebecca Conway, the Director of Research and Innovation here at NCFE. I'm relatively new in post. I've been here a couple of months now, I think about 6 weeks or so I might not have met too many of you yet. I'm really excited about this session today. So this session is on generative AI and assessment vulnerability, and it's being presented by colleagues from the Open University. So this session is actually the presentation of some research that we were really delighted to fund with the Assessment Innovation Fund, Window 5. So we gave the OU a grant of £45,000 to complete this research. The full report was published in September, and you'll be able to find this on the Assessment Innovation Fund website, and also from, I think, on the OU website as well, if you want to read the whole thing, which I'm sure you will when you hear the high-level findings. So this is a chance to hear from the team about the research that was conducted and to also ask some questions. I'm sure someone will provide a bit more information about how those questions will be submitted in just a moment's time. But for now, and the questions will come at the end, and we're also going to have Gray from NCFE, Gray Mitten, who leads on AI at NCFE, rounding things up and providing some reflections after our OU colleagues speak. For now, I want to introduce our colleagues from the OU, though. So Liz Hardy, Jonquil Lowe and Michelle Pride, who are going to be running the session for you today.
Thank you very much, and we're delighted to be here and to share with you the findings from our research into the robustness of different assessment types in the light of the developments we've seen in generative AI. The research was carried out by us at the Open University between March and July of this year. As has been said, the report is available, and we will share the links to the various reports and pieces of information at the end for you in the chat pod. So I'm Liz Hardy. I was the principal investigator on this project. I'm a senior lecturer in law for the Open University. I have a real interest in technology and online education, which is why I became involved in research around generative AI and therefore this project. I'm just going to ask my fellow presenters to introduce themselves before we start. Jonquil, can I come to you next?
Yes, hello. I'm Jonquil Lowe. I'm a senior lecturer in economics and personal finance at the Open University. So in my field of personal finance, AI is a really big topic. So there's a kind of interplay there. I also used to be an employability lead for my faculty. So I've got a strong interest in how AI plays into the employment field. Thank you, Liz.
Thanks. Kieran, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Kieran McCartney. I'm a staff tutor and senior lecturer in education and the School of Education, Childhood, Youth and Sport. And my interest, well, obviously I'm part of the project too, but my interest comes very much from the use of mobile technology and how it can be used for authentic learning and assessment, and obviously my interest is how AI can influence that.
Thanks, Kieran. Michelle?
Thank you. I'm Michelle Pride, the Academic Director in the Pro-Vice-Chancellor Students Office at the Open University with previous experience in Faculty as Associate Dean Teaching Excellence. And I will be monitoring the chat box today and try and answer any of your questions as we go, but we'll also save questions for the end. And I don't know if you want to say any more about the questions, Liz.
Yes, I will do in a minute. But great, I don't know, do you want to introduce yourself or do people know you?
Well, some do, but thanks, Liz. I'll just say hi. I'm Gray Mitten. I'm the Assessment Innovation Manager at NCFE. I work in our innovation team, and as Rebecca said, currently leading on a number of different AI projects across NCFE. I had the absolute pleasure of managing this project from NCFE's point of view, and it was a joy to work with the research team who, well, they delivered what they said they were going to, which is some really great insights into assessment type of vulnerability that you're going to hear about now. So yeah, it was a great piece of work, and I'm looking forward to sharing it with you today with the rest of the team.
Thanks, Gray. So as Michelle says, and we're going to present probably for around 35-40 minutes the findings from our research, and Gray's going to talk about his thoughts on the implications of this. So we're hoping to leave about 20 minutes for discussion, debate and questions at the end. So if you have any questions as we go along, please do pop them in the chat pod, and Michelle is going to be monitoring that, so she'll answer any questions she can do relatively quickly. If not, she'll save the questions up at the end. But there'll also be an opportunity, obviously, at the end for you to ask more questions. So this research was carried out by a multidisciplinary team. You can see the names on the list. There were 12 of us in total. The Open University has 4 different faculties covering all the range of subjects we teach. And we had 3 researchers, 3 academics from each of the 4 faculties. So it was truly a kind of pan-university, cross-disciplinary piece of research. We want to say thank you to NCFE's Assessment Innovation Fund for funding this project. We wanted to do a large-scale piece of research around assessment, which did require funding to be able to do it. And we were really grateful that they were able to provide us with that money, and that we can now kind of have some evidence to have those discussions around the impact of generative AI on assessment. So what we're going to do in the initial presentation part is we'll outline what our research was. I will do that, and then Junk will provide you with some of the findings around how well generative AI performs, and also how effective training is of markers to detect generative AI answers. As part of that, Kieran is also going to talk about some of our conclusions around what potentially could be robust assessment. And then I'll finish off by talking about our findings and recommendations, with Gray coming in at that point with some of his thoughts. So this really outlines the research. The questions we had from the Open University, which are questions I know a lot of educational institutions at further and higher education and also schools are kind of struggling with, is what's the impact of generative AI on the assessment methods that we've been using? So we had 3 research questions we tried to answer. The first was, which question types or assessment types are the most easily answered by generative AI and the least easily answered? So our essays more easily answered than numerical questions, authentic assessments, oral presentations. We wanted to know whether there was differences in the way that generative AI could answer those questions. We were interested to know if that varied across disciplines and levels. So by levels, I mean the different educational levels that questions are asked at. And for the purpose of this research, we focused on FHEQ level 3 for England and Wales. So that's the foundation access level prior to going to university, and then level 4, 5 and 6, which was undergraduate, first year, second year and third year level. We didn't do any lower levels or any postgraduate levels within this research. We also had some online training, which our colleagues had developed following an earlier, smaller piece of research. And we were interested to know whether training markers to detect answers that were written by generative AI could be effective or not. And that was in the light of the concerns that have been raised, within publications around the accuracy of detection tools for generative AI. So what we did was we came up with a list of 17 different assessment types, and John will in a minute will kind of go through those assessment types with you. And then we selected 58 examples of those different assessment types. So some of those assessment types just had 1 or 2 examples, others had up to 9 examples, depending upon the assessment type. And we chose those questions from assessments that the Open University had asked our students from 21-22 academic year. And that was chosen because, as we all know, ChatGPT was made available in November 2022. And so we felt reasonably confident that the answers students had submitted prior to that date were not likely to have been written by generative AI. As I said, the questions also came from 4 different levels and 17 different disciplines, ranging from maths to science, to computer science, to history, to law, to business. You can see the full list in the report if you want to know the disciplines that we looked at. We then found 10 authentic student answers from the 21-22 cohort, which we anonymised. They were selected by random selection, And then we generated 6 answers to the same question by generative AI. So we had PhD students generating the answers for us. It was they were generating answers in disciplines that were not their expertise. We decided simply to put the question and any student, any guidance the students were given into the LLM, the large language module, and copy and paste the answer that came out. So this was a relatively naive, unsophisticated way of doing it. It's a type of student who is not fact checking, not reviewing or reading the output from the generative AI. We simply cut and pasted it into a document. The only changes we made was that we removed any reference within the answer to it being generative AI, because sometimes the answers would start, with words like, as a large language module. And so we removed those words. And where the generative AI did not give us a reference list where it was appropriate for that type of assessment, we did add a reference list because we felt otherwise it might be too obvious to the markers which were generative AI and which were not. So we mixed up those 16 answers for each of the 59 questions, apologies. We gave the markers a batch of 8 scripts initially, 5 genuine scripts and 3 generative AI scripts. Now, importantly, the markers did not know how many generative AI scripts were in that batch. They knew there may well be some. They were aware of the purpose of the research, but they didn't know how many. So the markers gave each answer a grade and indicated whether or not they thought it was generative AI and the reasons why. They then did a short online training around how to recognize answers that are generated by AI. And then we repeated the exercise, the same assessment question, but with a different set of 8 scripts. So in total, this research involved just under 1,000 scripts, 944 answers in total, of which around 350 were generated by AI, and the rest were genuine student answers. So when we analysed this, we had a number of different pieces of data available to us, which meant we could do some qualitative and quantitative analysis. So we looked at the marking records to see what the markers, what grades the markers had given, which scripts they had identified as generative AI scripts, and why. We held focus groups with the markers, which was really informative about their experiences whilst doing this project. And then we looked at the training quizzes and the training surveys they carried out when they underwent the short online training. So we wanted to start by asking you what you thought. So please do pop your answer in the chat pod to these questions, because we came to this research expecting, to be honest, certain answers, which I suspect you have as well, some kind of thoughts around this. So which question types or assessment types do you think might be most or least easily answered by generative AI? Before we reveal the answers to you. Yep. So Rabina's saying multiple answer questions. I assume that's most easily answered. Yep. Lots of people are saying MCQs. Yep. Assignments. Any other thoughts around the types? Short questions. Yes, I thought that as well, Christopher, that they would be fairly easily answered. Yep. Essays. Do well with an explain or describe. Yes, a few people are saying essays or explain criteria. Yeah. Great. Well, we'll see in a moment if you're if you're right or not. Do you think there's any types of assessments that you think will be less easily answered by generative AI, that are a little bit more robust or GAI proof? I'm just pausing so people can answer. Things that are reflective, case studies, essays requiring referencing or critical thinking, mathematical involving equations. Yeah, okay. Yeah, case studies have been mentioned, questions involving ethics or morality, justifications, opinions. Okay, well, again, we'll share the answers to those with you through this presentation. And maths, yeah. Okay. The second question then we had as our research question was, did we think that this varied across disciplines or levels? So do you think there's any discipline or any particular level of study that would be most easily answered by generative AI? Programming? Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Science-based, IT, digital. So lots of people talking about the kind of STEM subjects. Yeah, languages, English, science, maths, fact-based, and the lower levels, level 3 or lower, and health. Yeah. Okay, no, that's great. And do you think there are any disciplines or levels that would be more robust, more generative AI proof in terms of questions? Philosophy? Yeah, that links to what people were saying earlier about opinions and ethics and beliefs. Thanks, Anna. Personal reflection relating to work placements, yep, and the higher levels like level 6. Yeah. Okay, well, as I say, all will be revealed by Jonquil in a moment, but I do have a spoiler here. Which may or may not surprise you. Virtually none of the question types that we tested are currently robust against generative AI. Only one of the 59 was robust. But we have suggestions as to how other assessment types could be designed to be more robust. Now, we're going to talk a lot about robustness in this presentation, so I thought I'd kind of explain to you what we meant as a project team. So we thought an assessment was robust if generative AI answers either failed that assessment, so students could answer it, but generative AI couldn't, or that generative AI answers could be very easily detected by markers so that students would be deterred from using it in their assessments. But I'm going to hand over, apologies, to Jonquil now, who's going to take you through the detail.
Thank you, Liz. Okay, so let's start by looking at how well generative AI performed, divided up by the question types. So along the horizontal axis of this chart, you can see the 17 different question types that Liz mentioned. You know, they range from things like essays and short answers through to reflections on skills or work study, and also some more unusual types, perhaps requiring alternative formats like slide presentations, infographics, perhaps recordings, particularly in subjects like languages, and so on. So those are the 17 types. On the vertical axis, there's the average grade for each question type. So remember, I think Liz mentioned that for each question type, we had between 1 and 9 questions that were marked. So this is the average across those, with 1 being the lowest grade, a fail, and 5 being the highest grade, a pass 1. Now the X's are the AI generated scripts, and the students are shown by the blue circles. And what you can see is there's a very kind of similar pattern to both the students and generative AI across the question types. Strictly speaking, it's a little bit dangerous to just compare generative AI with the student scripts here, because the student scripts were randomly selected from the 21-22 cohort, and they weren't normalized in any way to the cohort as a whole. So this is a valid comparison between the sample of students that we had, but not necessarily, we can't necessarily conclude that it holds for the cohort as a whole. What it shows is that generative AI passed virtually all the question types, and in some cases did even better than the students in the sample. However, there was one outlier, that's a type that we called activity plan, where generative AI just failed all of the scripts. So I'm going to take just a little look at that question just to see what insights that might give us. Now, the first thing to note is that it was a role play type question. So students were asked to take on the role of a consultant advising a local authority on how to evaluate a healthy eating initiative. And importantly, the students had to apply some very specific techniques that they had been learning in the module materials. So that was a particular kind of theory of change model. And also they had to select a relevant statistical technique, which could be a randomized controlled trial, difference in difference, something like that. So there was a very solid foot in the module materials that fed through into this assessment. The other thing that is worth noting is that it had quite a specific rubric, which was not just for the markers, it was also shared with the students and indeed fed into generative AI. So this set out how the marks would be awarded. And the kind of third factor about this question is that the marker stuck very closely to the rubric when awarding the marks and simply found that generative AI didn't produce the kind of answer that could score high marks given the question and the rubric. So let's turn now to how well generative AI performed across discipline and level. So in this chart, again, you've got the average grades, but in this instance, it's just for the AI scripts, not for the student scripts. And I draw your attention to the way that generative AI is performing pretty well at level 3, which is the access level, the pre-university study level, where perhaps questions tend to be a bit more knowledge-based. And then the performance really declines as the level increases, so that by level 6, third year university level, generative AI is not doing as well. This chart also shows the breakdown by discipline, but the disciplines had a different combination of questions from different levels. And so really we can't draw any strong conclusions about the disciplines. They're very much dominated by this level effect. But basically what this is showing is that generative AI finds it more difficult to deal with those questions that that require higher level critical thinking skills. I think, as Abraham was saying in the chat, those higher order skills in the Bloom's taxonomy. So I'm going to turn now to the impact of training on detection of AI scripts, and just a few words about the training that we did. So as Liz said, this was based on training developed out of a smaller pilot study, and it was an online course that the markers took in their own time. It took probably about 2 hours, and that course is now available on a publicly available site, so you can access that training if you'd like to. And this is just a small example of what that training kind of looks like. So there are sections that kind of alert markers to the kind of characteristics that are sometimes seen in generative AI answers, what we've tended to call the hallmarks of AI, and also some guidance on things that aren't very helpful in detection as well. And the training also had various quizzes embedded and a survey at the end. So just before I move on to our results, do you have any thoughts about whether you think the training would have improved the detection of AI scripts? Do you think that might vary by the different question types or subjects or levels? If you'd just like to pop some thoughts in the chat, that would be great. deathly hush. Okay, so yeah, you guess it improved detection. Yeah, okay, that's really interesting. We did a presentation yesterday where actually we had a much more cynical audience who really didn't think that training would help at all. So it's quite kind of reassuring that you think that training might help. So let's have a look. So here is the detection of the AI scripts before training and after training. Now, this is on the basis of the questions. One question there was a problem with, so it dropped out of this part of the analysis. So this is based on 58 of the questions. Now, if you remember, each time the markers were marking a batch of 8 questions, 3 of which were generative AI and 5 of which were student. So if the markers detected all of the generative AI scripts, then that question would get a perfect score of 3. If the markers didn't detect any of the AI scripts, then that would be a detection score of 0. So what you're seeing is the detection scores. And the chart on the left is showing that before the training, that perfect score of 3 was achieved for just under 50% of the questions. After training, that shot up to 80% or nearly 80%. So that looks like a really good result for training the markers and in line with what you were saying in the chat. Training did improve the detection of GAI scripts. And that was found across the majority of the question types. So 10 of the question types saw an improvement, another 4 saw no change. Sometimes that was due to what we've called a ceiling effect. It was that the markers before training were already detecting all of the AI scripts, and so there was no room for them to improve their detection rate at all. And then just in 3 cases, the detection rate worsened. However, that's only part of the story. We also need to look at what happened to the what I've called detection of the student scripts. So again, just recalling, each batch of marking had 5 student scripts. So if the markers identified all of the student scripts correctly as being from students, then that would be a perfect score of 5. And similarly, if there were none, then that would be a score of 0. So that's the range of scores. And the chart on the left, you can see that pre-training, the markers were correctly detecting the student scripts in 80% of the questions. But after training, that fell, that detection rate, that perfect detection score fell to only 55% of the script of the questions, which means that there were many more false positives where markers were incorrectly thinking that a genuine student script was in fact AI created. And the feedback that we were getting from markers was they really liked the training. They found it really useful. It increased their confidence and it gave them a language to articulate why they thought a script was AI generated, whereas before they'd just had a gut feeling. But the problem was it also increased their awareness of those hallmarks of generative AI, and they started to see them everywhere, including in the student scripts. And that was widespread. So again, this is that increase in false positives was being seen across 10 of the questions, no change with another 5, and that there was only an improvement for 2 of the questions. So the problem with training is that, yes, it improves AI detection, but it also increases the rate of false positives. So training for detection really doesn't seem a way forward. And I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Kieran to take you through a bit more about those hallmarks of generative AI.
That's great. Thank you, Jonquil. Yes, everyone, you can see here the image in front of you are some of the things that we captured, but I'm going to focus on two specifically. The first one is right in the center at the top, and the tendency towards American spelling and phrases, which in some ways led us down the incorrect path. One of the things that a lot of the markers thought that could help them identify an artificial intelligence created assignment was the use of American English. And originally we thought, yes, that could be a marker. And then we realized something that was actually quite important. The use of Americanized English was very common outside the UK. So we might have our Word documents set up for English within the UK, but you could have students internationally who are using Americanized English, correctly using it and not using AI. So it could lead us down the wrong path. The other one was, well, we'll talk about is the failure to use module materials. Now, to put this into a context, within the Open University, the module materials are our teacher. We spend a lot of time getting these module materials correct, and that is the primary source from which students get their information upon which they're assessed. We found out that when students weren't using module materials, it was a clear indicator that they might be using artificial intelligence because the AI didn't have any knowledge about the module materials and how it could be used. So because the AI didn't have knowledge of those module materials, it didn't know how to answer the questions that we had set in our exams or within our assignments. So the key takeaway here is the contextualization of the information. This was also quite interesting, and bear with me while I take you through this one. Here we're looking at the hallmarks of AI, and what you see here on the graph is in the orange, you've got there what represents cases where there is detection or hallmarks of AI, and then in blue, what we call are the false positives. So these represent cases where there may have been a hallmark, but it was falsely identified in the student scripts because we'd flagged it incorrectly. For example, some of the things that we thought were hallmarks, as I touched on about the Americanized English there, was the tone or language or the style and format. Another thing were superficial responses. A large number of AI-generated scripts were flagged as superficial. So those issues are less frequently or led to more false positives. The key takeaway from this slide is that the tone and language and the lack of personalized module materials and superficial writing were strong indicators of the presence of AI and its usage within student work. And while human scripts are more prone to spelling errors and even flawed augmentation, so they were quite important takeaways. Finally, before I pass back to Liz, this is a really interesting slide, and what I'd like you to focus upon here are the boxes that are highlighted in bold. What we noticed was that there were some question types that AI was just not good at addressing and couldn't defeat. And these were the more types of authentic assessment, as we termed it. And I'm going to draw out two examples. The first one was role play questions. And the reason why AI had an issue with that is because it required applying knowledge from a real world scenario that the AI didn't have knowledge about into an answer. So it found that very difficult. And the other one was reflections. So where a student was asked to reflect on, for example, their work-based practice or reflect on something that happened in the real life, because the AI did not have contextual understanding of what had taken place, it provided a very generalized response. So if you're taking away from these are two good types of assessments that AI weren't as prone to overcoming. And with that, I'll pass over to Liz.
Thank you, Kieran. So these are our key findings. So it just summarises what Jonquil and Kieran have already shared with you. We know, and the markers confirmed it for us through the focus groups, that what's been done previously to detect plagiarism, which tended to be the use of detection tools, identifying copied material from the internet, it no longer works in the case of generative AI because of the unique nature of the output of the various tools. We found out that training the markers does improve their detection of generative AI. That was fairly clear. But there was also this increase in false positives, so falsely suspecting that students had used generative AI in their answers. So overall, our feeling was that relying only on detection as a way of addressing these issues might not be feasible in the longer term. It may not be fair to students who are falsely accused, and certainly in our institution, dealing with these kinds of issues takes a lot of time and a lot of capacity, and particularly if the numbers of referrals increase. However, what did strike us was that these hallmarks of generative AI, these characteristics of a generative AI answer, although they do occur in authentic student scripts, usually that's in the context of a student who has weak or poor study skills. And so an alternative approach, perhaps in the first instance, might well be to focus on those study skills, because whether your concerns are because a student has used generative AI inappropriately, or whether it's a student who has poor study skills, for example, is unable to come to a conclusion, that what they need is some support to improve their skills, either in the use of generative AI or more generally. As has been discussed, no question types were currently robust, in that even those authentic type assessments were still passing. The generative AI answers were still obtaining a pass, albeit at a lower level, rather than at a kind of pass 1, pass 2 first and 2-1 stage. But some types are definitely less robust. So you correctly identified a lot of those in the chat earlier. So shorter answers, more descriptive, factual answers are definitely easier to answer by generative AI. However, although we can't wave a magic wand and say this assessment type, is robust, you can use it, it's fine. What we were able to say is that some assessment types can be made more robust by the way that they're designed. And in particular, by designing your question almost to take advantage of those characteristics of generative AI. So if you're asking an essay question, make sure that, the question and the marking guidance, crucially, requires students to come to a reasoned conclusion. So to give their opinion and to back it up with evidence and their reasons, because we know generative AI can't do that. And so it is possible to make assessment types more robust by doing that. And there are other suggestions in our report about how you could do that. For example, by perhaps requiring students to show their process as well as an output of the assessment. You thinking again about those characteristics, those hallmarks of generative AI, what it did show is that those higher level skills, those more human skills, some research calls it, things like developing critical thinking and things like the ability to draw reasoned conclusions, those are skills that we should be preparing our students for and encouraging our students for to be able to do. And again, to reflect that within the assessment design and the marking guidance, rather than perhaps simply focusing on giving marks for descriptive knowledge, which is quite easy for a generative AI to do for the student. More widely, what came out of the research, particularly from the 40+ markers that we involved in this research, was the need to develop students' critical AI literacy. And by that we mean we need to explain to students what generative AI is, what the implications of using it is, what the limitations are of the tool, because a lot of our students think it's like an internet search engine and don't understand these issues that became apparent through the research around its limitations. So we need to be showing students how to use it ethically and effectively. And actually that in itself will probably reduce the amount of reliance that students have on this tool in terms of using it inappropriately for assessment purposes. So these were our recommendations. I'm going to go through them fairly quickly because I'm conscious of the time. I want to leave time for Gray and a bit of a discussion and questions. But we felt the hallmarks of GAI, the characteristics of generative AI answers, the value was around assessment design. And that was very much our recommendations. You know, we should be focusing on that assessment design, making sure that the marking rubric or guidance aligns with that, and thinking about skills interventions for students. In terms of whose responsibility is this, it needs to be an institutional approach. It can't be treated as just an issue for markers or even for those setting assessments on individual courses. It needs to be a whole institution approach. And because of the capacity that may be required to amend and to look again at assessments, we recommended that institutions should risk assess their assessments. So look to see which are the easiest to be answered by generative AI. The University of Greenwich has a really good AI risk measure scale, and focus on those initially and focus on designing it in a way that makes it more difficult for AI to answer. In terms of academic conduct and skills, which often comes up, as I said, we do think there's a greater role here for a pre-referral skills intervention for students for whom there are suspicions of generative AI. I won't say any more on that because I've already explained it. But what did come out through particularly the qualitative research was the need for institutions to have a process to record these interventions, because often they're carried out by individual academics, tutors, course leaders. And if they're not recorded anywhere, if the problems occur again, it can lead to a situation where students are getting repeated skills interventions, where possibly at that point it needs to be escalated further. The other thing that came out very clearly is that staff, academics, were starting to feel uncertain about what their role was in marking essays in terms of academic conduct when it came to generative AI. And so institutions need to provide all teaching staff with clarity about their role and have that clarity around how the process applies to answers that might be generative AI rather than authentic. And the other big theme that came out through our research and through the data we had was the need for training. So we need to train not only the markers, which is what we focused on in this research, but crucially, because of the focus on assessment design, we need to be training the staff who produce the curriculum and set the assessments. And also we need to think about, as I said earlier, training the students, because that not only will help them to better understand and address their assessments, but of course, increasingly it's going to be needed generative AI skills for employability. So I'm going to pass over to Gray now, and I think he's going to provide some reflections.
Thanks, Liz. I have one slide in just a few minutes, so now would be a good time to get your questions going in the chat, ready for the team to pick up in just a couple of minutes' time, if you want to do that. So thank you to Liz, Jonquil and Kieran for that. I think really there was two things that I just wanted to highlight. There's nothing new on this slide, but just to highlight what NCFE's perspective can be on these findings. And the first one is that detection is just really challenging still. I don't know if I was second guessing myself, but I did wonder whether this research would show that we could train people to spot generative AI misuse, and that would be, a really helpful thing that we could then sort of pass on. But even though that did happen, as you heard Jonquil telling us, the fact that false positives also rose is a huge problem for not just NCFE, but for the sector and for the kind of potential injustice for learners. So reliably detecting generative AI misuse is a problem. And whilst we do know that there are other methods to do this automatically, kind of in the pipeline being developed, we don't know if they're going to work. So we can just go on what we know today, and that is that detection is an issue. So that then sort of leads us at NCFE to fall back on, okay, what can we do? What's our role in this, and in trying to find a solution? And really our role comes down to qualification and assessment design. So I think there's two main points here. One is that we can kind of look ahead and see that as generative AI use becomes more normal in industry, then as we reform and design new qualifications, that will feed into our the employer input that we get already for our qualification design, and it's likely that we'll then see learning outcomes and parts of qualifications and you know, parts of kind of skills within those where actually AI misuse becomes AI permitted use or acceptable use, because that mirrors what's happening in industry, and that is a win-win because it reduces the burden a bit on detection and it reduces the concerns, I guess, of misuse, but it also helps prepare students for industry. So win-win on that. And the second point is we have to be realistic and accept that Gen AI has shown its ability in this work to pass 58 out of 59 different assessments, 16 out of 17 types, and so we can't design out the vulnerabilities. However, we can reduce the vulnerabilities by going back to those assessments that are based in the real world, that require personalized or bespoke responses, and importantly, as Liz just reminded us, that is backed up in the mark schemes for that work where personalized and bespoke responses are rewarded in the mark scheme. And you know, this is a challenge for NCFE in terms of how we design our external assessments, but there are a lot of assessments that take place on our qualifications that are designed internally, and I did check this yesterday to check I was still right, and our internal assessment design, where our providers design and run the assessments for learners, they currently have 14 different assessment types within the kind of, I guess, menu of choices of things that you can do. And really, it's just to encourage customers that are listening to use the full range of those, and in particular, have your go-to ones that are those real-world backed assessment types that do require that kind of personalised and bespoke responses that we've heard about in terms of reflections and returns of things like that. So yeah, thank you for the presentation and for letting me just have my two-piece worth. I'm going to hand back to Liz.
Thank you very much, Gray. So we've now got, I think, just over 10 minutes available for questions, debate, discussion. Michelle's going to, I think, lead this. We're happy to take questions on the research. And also, you know, we're really interested to know your views around what the implications of this might be for future assessment in your context and in your institution, because we are keen to continue to learn and to share sort of best practice in this area. So, Michelle, can I hand over to you?
Certainly, we've got 4 questions so far, and I'm just going to add my 2 cents in. And one thing that really struck us, and I just want to re-emphasize, is that whether a student is using generative AI or whether the student submits an answer that is weak, they need support. They need help with their academic skills and developing as an academic. And so it's really important that we think about how we support students rather than necessarily thinking about being punitive and going down that road. So with that in mind, Liz, I want to ask the first question to the group. Is from Ian. How do we risk assess and change assessments in response to research like this, when often we are tied in for 5 years to assessment approaches, types with little room for mid-flight change? And given the rate of change of development of AI, how do we position ourselves to be flexible and responsive in our qualifications moving forward? And we all face this challenge.
Yep. I'll answer the second bit, and then Gray, if it's all right, I think I'll come over to you about the question around, because you may have some insight into T-levels and those kinds of assessments. But in terms of, you know, the change of the rapid change and development, both of generative AI and also the detection tools, there seems to be a bit of an arms race going on at the moment. Absolutely, that there is that need for ongoing training. We can't stand still in this, and certainly, you know, this research, I think, gives us some really good indications of where to go, but we're going to continually need to keep up to date. What I would say is that unless something changes, and that might happen, I am not a technician here, but at the moment, even though the large language models are improving, they're getting more sophisticated, they're getting faster, they're working in the same way. They're a predictive tool. They're not a database. They're not a search engine. And so I think what we can do is, by focusing on the characteristics of generative AI, we can still, even if it changes in the future, I think there will fundamentally be problems over things like generative AI expressing an opinion that's backed up by reasoned evidence, because of the fact it is based on a probability tool rather than anything else that's more substantive. So yes, we need to keep up to date, but I think by focusing on that what is generative AI question and those characteristics, it does enable us, even if the tools evolve, to still be able to kind of respond to it. Great. Can I come to you about the question around how we risk assess and change assessments when perhaps they might be tied in for a number of years for T levels? Do you have any insights into that?
So I guess I'd make 2 points. We can't future gaze. It's impossible. If as you mentioned, Liz, ChatGPT is 2 years old next month. If you think back 2.5 years, we couldn't have foreseen the capabilities of Gen AI that it has today, and so I just don't think we should start to try and second guess that. What we can do, Ian, and I know you're grappling with this right now, with some of the Gen 2 T-level things. What we can do is risk assess what we have currently and what we have planned, based on what we know today. What I do think is quite useful here is that exactly this kind of research gives us really good evidence to go to our stakeholders and say that 5 years is too long with no change, and maybe we need some more flexibility in our systems and our approaches to make those changes, as you put it, mid-flight. 5 years is a long time without Gen AI, in terms of other industry updates and so on. So I think it's good evidence for us to say, like I say, to those stakeholders, give us some more flexibility, give us the ability to change things mid-flight so we can keep up, to this challenge and to other kind of industry updates.
Thanks, great. I'm going to pose the next question back to the group. And Kieran, I think you might be able to answer this. Jonquil, I could be wrong. This is from Anna. Can you give us an example of assessment that you changed to make them more generative AI robust? What did you change, and how do you measure the effectiveness of those changes? So I realize it's still early days. We too have long production times and long times that we keep our assessments. So those challenges are fair for all of us. Jonquil, Kieran, would you like to come in?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm part of a team that at the moment is creating a new module. So we're thinking about assessment, and we are very aware that our assessments need to move away from perhaps just setting an essay topic that's maybe supported by a case study, with the case study changing from year to year. That actually that's not enough, because if you put the case study as well as the question into generative AI, those kind of questions it deals with quite easily. So we're looking more at structuring questions that really do require an application of what's been taught in the module to kind of real world scenarios. And I'd also say with reflections, I think we've been very bad with reflections in the past, where often they've been quite generic in the answer they expected. Describe a study skill that you've improved, that sort of situation. But what's needed is some really hard evidence being required as part of that answer, and that would distinguish from the more generic type answers that generative AI produces. So that's a couple of examples. We haven't had a chance to road test them yet, because to be honest, this is also new. We're still in the reacting phase.
Thanks, John. Kieran, please come in.
Thank you. Probably a couple of things. I know that Jonquil and Liz And then separately, myself and Michelle are looking at some research in relation to transferable skills and artificial intelligence. Perhaps the question, and to give a context to this, is that, often the acquisition of knowledge and the demonstration of that knowledge is present in further and higher education, and that's how we award marks for assignments and the achievement of learning outcomes. But what if the learning outcomes look more about how the students used tools to solve problems, the kind of skills that we require in the workplace, and then we mark and monitor that? So, where the student admits to using AI, show us how did show your lecturer how you did it. How did you help use it to solve a problem? Did it make the problem worse? Did it make it better? Talk us through your thinking processes and how you did that. Because we all know, well, I'm speaking very generically here, there's very little of my degree I actually use in my job. But the skill set that I use to get that degree, I use all the time. Using resources, problem solving, time management, working with others. So maybe is that the way we go? Just
Thanks, Kieran. And when people say soft skills and hard skills, I say no. The soft skills are hard. Let's talk about human skills and ensuring that we develop our human skills. We've just got a couple of minutes left. I'm just going to go to 2 questions from Rabina in reverse order. The first one was, do you see any short-term positive impacts or improvements in assessment quality due to generative AI? And I just would like to answer that one from my perspective in an administrative position. I think it's absolutely brilliant that it's forcing us to think about why we assess, how we assess. It's caused us at the Open University to rethink what is learning. We're thinking how do we then evidence that learning is taking place. So I think it's a really exciting place for us to be in as we move forward. Plagiarism has existed for 1 million years and probably longer than that. There's a very small percentage of people who are willing to cheat and go to lengths to cheat. Let's not focus on that. Let's focus on what's exciting about, as Kieran said, skills acquisition, learning, and how we evidence that learning. And the last question from Rubina is, do you have any plans to extend on this research? If so, what will you look at next? I'm not sure whether Liz or John will want to pick up on our project. Liz?
Yes, I'll pick up on that. So at the moment, we have no plans to repeat this particular research around assessment. I know there was also a question in the chat, could we do it at the lower levels? The OU would struggle to do it at the lower levels because we only go down to level 3. But what we are quite happy to do is for people to take our methodology and to have a go at it yourself in your institution, because it wasn't it needed to have the investment in terms of the paying the markers to do the work, but actually it's quite simple to run. So we would be delighted if anybody wanted to repeat it in your context. Please do let us know as well how you got on and what the findings were. What we're actually researching, a smaller group of us from across the university at the moment, is the other side to this, which is what should we actually be teaching students around generative AI, and how can we assess their generative AI knowledge and skills? Because what came out from this research was that very strong feeling that we should be teaching students critical AI literacy. So we are in the middle of some mainly qualitative research at the moment, but also some research in terms of examining what the job market is asking in terms of generative AI skills, what that employability skill demand is going to be in this area. And we're hoping by Christmas to have produced a report which will kind of look at that aspect of not just assessment, but what should we actually be teaching students, both in terms of knowledge and skills.
Thanks, Liz. And right on time, handing back to Gray for the final word.
Well, I'm going to hand straight back to Rebecca for the final word, and I'm going
My apologies, Rebecca.
No, it's fine.
That's fine. Don't worry. I'd have to say that was a fantastic presentation. Thanks so much, Liz, John Paul, Michelle, Kieran, and Ray. I think my big takeaway from that is context is king for the moment, isn't it? So the more we can contextualize our assessment, the better we can be at cheating the AI at their own game. We'll certainly be taking these learnings into our work in assessment design and other parts of the organisation. And I think the points on training as well, we're doing lots of work on that internally, which Gray's leading. Thank you so much. There's more information here on the screen. And please do take a look at the full report, everybody, and get in touch to follow up with us or with colleagues from the OU. We are going to answer those remaining questions for colleagues who didn't get your questions answered. So bear with us and we'll get those out to everyone. But thank you again for a really useful session.